This is a taped interview for 1994 with Mr. Herschel M. Downs of Shreveport, Louisiana. The interview will begin at approximately 11 o'clock and run through about an hour and a half. Surveys will be distributed at the end. I have to get out of the way there. I have hastily reviewed what you wrote up for Mrs. Hargrove, and to refresh my memory, I read your World War II reminiscences this summer. You have a very interesting career. That's not too obtrusive.
No, will it be able to pick up the whole interview
yes,
from there?
It's really strong. It's really strong. But as I was telling Mr. Hargrove, the focus of my thesis is that World War II is a very important event in the veteran's life. As one veteran described it, his life has been BW and AW, before the war and after the war. And what I'm looking at is after the war, and seeing how things like the GI Bill and war experiences, combat experiences, affected veterans in their integration and formulation of the American middle class has been so prominent the past 50 years. And that's what I was going to ask you questions about.
All right.
And I can tell you, you're going to have a very interesting story, not only from what you've written, but just about your career. And I wanted to start off, though, back at about 44, 45, and with the day that you heard of FDR's death, and how did you hear that, and what happened when you heard that?
I don't recall specifically when I heard about his death, and I, of course, remember most of what was going on was on the radio, and I did remember seeing the newsreels about it, and about carrying his body from Warm Springs up to north to be buried. But that's about all I recall about it at the time.
Were you on active duty?
Well, what was the exact date of his death?
It was in March of 44. It was about 3 months after he was inaugurated. It was around there. Yes, it was 3 months after he was inaugurated. In March. I don't remember the exact day.
Right. Well, in March of 1944, I was on a destroyer, and I was on anti-submarine patrol at that time. So I probably would not have known about it except over the radio. The ship, of course, had a little news broadcast every day, kind of a synopsis of what they picked up from either the BBC or one of the other broadcasting systems, or one, maybe they picked up one from the States. But most of the time we were on radio blackout, so we just got isolated bits of news.
Well, did you know who Harry Truman was, the new president? Was he a complete enigma to you folks out there?
No, I did not recall specifically, but he had not been a very prominent figure, and it had not really made any impact on me.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. How did Truman took over from Roosevelt? Roosevelt had been president for 3 terms, and
right.
Good long period of time. When you came back to the United States, what did you think about Harry Truman as a president? I mean, were you pleased with his performance?
The first thing was the noticeable difference between his style and the style that Roosevelt had. Roosevelt was a very polished speaker with a very polished type voice, and Truman sounded so flat and sounded like he had just stepped out of the boondocks somewhere. That was my impression of him, and really just wondered, what kind of man he would turn out to be, what kind of president he would turn out to be.
Truman said he never gave a second thought to dropping the atomic bomb, and he was actually glad that he went through with that decision because it saved a lot of lives. Where were you? Were you still out on the destroyer when you heard about that?
No, I was in. I had been transferred to shore duty at Norfolk, and I was on the staff of gunnery school in Norfolk. And when we first heard about the atomic bomb, my first thought was, I remember that I had studied in school about a caloric bomb, which tests food for the number of calories in it, and that was the only kind of bomb that I had heard of that was close to atomic bomb, and it was not till sometime later on that I learned exactly what the nature of an atomic bomb was.
Would you have gone to Japan if, or the Pacific?
No, I would not have gone to Japan, because I had been transferred off of my destroyer in the late fall of 1944, and my destroyer was converted into a destroyer minesweeper, and it was scheduled for duty over in the Pacific. All of my duty had been in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and up in the Arctic, but I would not have been scheduled to go to Japan unless I had received some different orders. But the way things turned out, between the time that I had been transferred off of my ship and the time that the atomic bomb was dropped, no, I would not have gone to Japan.
Well, that's interesting. A caloric bomb. Every veteran that I've talked to so far has a very personal reaction to atomic bomb. One fellow was a Navy armorer on a PBY. He said, "I'm familiar with every type of bomb in the United States Navy and Air Force."
Excuse me, just let me turn it up.
This veteran said, "I've worked with every type of ordnance the United States Navy drops," and he didn't know. He said, "What the hell is an atomic bomb?"
Yeah, right.
And atomic power is definitely a very mysterious thing to Americans, especially in the early 40s and in the 50s. As you found out what the atomic bomb did, with one bomb they wiped out from the military necessity of it, what did you think? You saw that, you'd seen the destructive power of war in general. What did you think about the arms race that started growing after that? With the Soviets, the competition that we were in with the Soviets. Did you feel that was...
Well, yes, all of the scientists, not all of them, but several of the scientists were talking about what the result would be if they kept on with this atomic development, and particularly directed toward bombs and explosions, and how it would be one day that the Earth may be blown up because of somebody exploding one of these bombs.
But did that frighten you, though? I mean, when you were...
Well, it was just something that was looming in the background that you knew that might happen, but couldn't say I was particularly frightened about it, because it was all more theory to me than it was anything practical.
Except out of the tax money that we paid into it over the years.
I never stopped to consider what the cost of it was.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Atomic bomb is a complete dividing line. I guess the war. That's just a symbol of how the world changed, I guess, since the Depression in '39, and the 30s and ending in '39, '40, and then what comes afterwards in the '60s with computers and all sorts of.
Right. No, it was not until I got into the business world that really what the cost of the war had been and what the government expenditures were that I got concerned about the amount of money that was being spent by the government. Not necessarily for the atomic bomb, because it didn't stand out as any one particular item, but just for the total budget.
Would you expand some more on it? That's interesting. Why did you feel concerned about it? What sparked your concern? What was it that got you concerned about that?
Well, seeing what the national deficit was, also I started paying income tax, and during the war, as I recall, I didn't pay any income tax, and it was only when I became a taxpayer that, and I began to feel personally then as to
where it was going.
Where it was going. I was part of my money was going on, and started taking a larger and larger chunk of it.
Based on that, in my opinion, I would say, well, because he felt that way, perhaps he saw what happened in Vietnam as a waste of money and a waste of life and blood, treasure. Did you see Vietnam as that way?
No, the way the government presented, see, the propaganda that came out, or always the government side, same way during the World War II. Everything is slanted toward getting behind the government and what they make a decision to do. And the information that you receive doesn't allow you to make a real complete decision on what's being done, because you don't have all the information. You just have the information that you get from the government. So naturally, I was with it, from what was appearing around and about in the newspaper and here on the radio and then later on the TV. In the early stages particularly, this was something that was necessary to prevent the spread of communism. And that was what the line was at the time. And I thought, well, that sounds reasonable to me. It was not only until after you get through and it's over with and you look back and see some of the things that had occurred that you really are concerned about it.
Well, let's go back to 45. I know that you spent time in the Navy, and that it says here that you were to report to the University of Idaho for the ROTC program, and that you based on that you resigned.
I resigned my commission at that time. That's right.
So was by that time? I guess the whole, I don't know what you remember, but if you look at Life magazines from around that time, there's a lot of articles about the waves of servicemen, just inundating the shores. I guess for you, demobilization didn't take very long. The whole discharge process. No,
it did not, because I had been before a board, as the Navy called it, a board of medical survey. I had had some difficulty with my eyes. My vision was not good, and so I had to report to the board of medical survey. They were going to examine me to see whether or not I should be continue on active duty, or whether I should be retired with a medical disability. All that was wrong with me at the time was that I was nearsighted, had myopia, and even for the board, it took them a long time to make a decision as to what to do with me. So in the interim, they ordered me that I could return home, still on active duty in the Navy, but with no particular duty except to wait for the decision of the medical board. So in the meantime, when I came home, I took a civilian job while I was waiting for them to make up their minds to what to do. And I had become so entrenched in civilian life, whenever I finally got decided, well, I would continue on active duty till I continue on civilian life. Besides that, having a medical disability on your record as a regular Navy officer would certainly limit your potential for future promotion later on. So those things factored into my decision to resign when I got those orders.
So you were considering about making the Navy a career?
Yes, see, I had been a regular officer in the Navy,
and you'd been to the service.
That's right, I'd been to Service Academy, and had a future fairly well assured, because all of the Academy graduates eventually, if you do your job and are diligent, you're assured of a good career in the Navy, unless something unforetold happens. And in this particular instance, something unforetold did happen. I went before a board of medical survey, and I felt like that would be a blemish on the record that would show up later on. And when there was choice in the higher ranks between several people vying for the same position, the one that was completely physically perfect would get the nod.
Well, that's interesting. You waited, 2 years? 2 or 3, almost. Yeah, I guess you've been almost. You came back to the States. You've been in the States since 40? I
got back in the States in late 44. That's right, and it was. And then I had been transferred off my destroyer up to the gunnery school in Norfolk, and we spent time up there a good while.
You really didn't have any type of problem readjusting then?
No, I was already embedded in civilian life at the time that I got out, so there was no problem at all.
That's not surprising.
No, my problem that I had was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because when I had come back to Shreveport, I took a job as a draftsman which is in the city, which was just a menial type job, and I wanted to do something more. And I was in the process of trying to figure out what it was that I wanted to do when I resigned. And
well, that's where, when you were thinking about what you were going to do in the future, I noticed here that you called the future a new chapter, which is really, really I think a good title for what would happen next. When you were thinking about what to go on, did you consider the GI Bill that had been?
Yes, I did consider the GI Bill. As a matter of fact, the type of training that I'd had made it look around Shreveport there were not too many openings for what I could do. I had a Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in electrical engineering. In looking around at the several places that I had inquired into in Shreveport, it did not look like that there was any particular advancement, and I ran across a classmate from high school who was in law school at LSU, and it just suddenly struck me that I had for some time, from when I was in grammar school, had considered becoming a lawyer. So that was all it took. I saw that my classmate was down there, that he was on the GI Bill, and so that's what I decided to take advantage of the GI Bill to go to law school.
Mm-hmm. You were married, so were you happy with I think you all got $75 a month. You got all your tuition paid. But you got
the tuition paid, and as I recall,
did you live off that $75?
As I recall, we got a little more of $75 because of being married. It seemed like that I got something like $120.
They did up it after 45. They
adjusted
the
I was getting about $125. But we couldn't survive on that. So in going to law school, I took another part-time job again as a draftsman with the Department of Public Works in Baton Rouge, and worked in the afternoons. I went to law school in the morning, worked in the afternoons to supplement the income. So with close budgeting and watching our pennies, we were able to make it, and we're happy. Yes, we were happy.
You were happy. Well,
yeah.
I've read a variety of things that veterans try to do to beat the cost of housing, and it was really rather tight there for a few years right after the war. Could you elaborate a little bit more about where you lived and how you lived with your wife? And did you have some veterans, moved into housing that didn't even have a bathroom, that didn't have a
we were real fortunate. The first semester, I left Margaret and our daughter Margaret here in Shreveport. We had a small rented apartment, and I lived in the Pentagon Barracks in on LSU's campus for the first semester. And the American Legion in Baton Rouge was promoting a housing project called Legion Village in the north part of Baton Rouge. And a veteran could buy one of those houses if he were employed by signing a promissory note as a down payment. And then, as I recall, there was a series of maybe 2 or 3 of these notes, and as they became new, if you had paid your rent, or made your house payments, I should say, periodically and on time, they would forgive these notes as they became due. But I was not employed full time. I had to make a down payment on this house that we bought. But it worked out to be, we're moving into a nice new little home, and it was real satisfactory. I had no problems at all with it.
Well, that does sound a lot nice. Some of the veterans,
Right, we tried to get on the campus. They had what they call hutments for the veterans that were fixed up. And we tried to get those because those were really low rent. But because I was so late registering and getting into law school, all of the veterans facilities there had been occupied, so I had to look outside the campus for something.
How long did it take you to complete your law degree? Did it take the normal amount of complement of time, or did you try to get it done?
No, we went through on a rush program where we went summer school right on through, so it took something like 30 months. Normally it would have been full 3 years, if you did not go to summer school for 30 months. That's what we.
That must have been tough.
Well, it was something a little bit different from what I had done, because the reading assignments and the research assignments occupied so much time. So I was busy the whole time there.
I read other places where the veterans had said that they had problems, or they felt that they were having problems trying to get situated with the work. They weren't used to reading, a lot of books and writing papers and things like that. They were used to a very military style where you were just told to do something.
Right.
They did find it rather. Did you have any problems with any of your non-veteran students? Did you feel like you perhaps were lacking any type of?
No. I had no problem. I had at the Naval Academy study and was just a thing that you had to dig in and do. So it was just a continuation of that, except that I had a little tighter schedule now because I was working in the afternoon. So I did not have all the leisure time to study that some of the others had. Could go to the library and study in the afternoon. I had to do that all after work at night, but I felt like I was prepared for it.
It's a good feeling though, walking across the stage and getting your diploma at the end.
It was a very good stage to get out from under that tight schedule that we had been working on. It sure was.
Well, I think I'm writing my master's thesis right now, and I'm under the gun trying to get done in 2 years.
Right.
I know the feeling of how it's tough. It's really tough. Well, talking about the GI Bill, you said you mentioned you bumped into a friend of yours from high school that was a veteran and had taken advantage of going to law school too. Did you know any vets that didn't take advantage of the GI Bill because they thought it was too much red tape to fiddle with trying to get a loan or try to go to school? It was too much of a hassle? Did you?
No, I can't recall. I'm sure that there were some, but I didn't know any of them. A large number of my class in law school were veterans that were going on the GI Bill.
And you graduated in
1950.
1950.
Right. In February of 1950, which would have been midterm. Mm-hmm. Now the normal graduating class that was going through on the 3 years, because they would have graduated the following June.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Cool. So I guess rating. Yeah, you went to the Service Academy, you had a very good career in the Navy, and then you took advantage of the GI Bill. How much do you think the GI Bill has improved or changed your life? Your life was probably going one way up to that point.
Well, I think, as you were talking about the atomic bomb, the GI Bill, which enabled me to go to law school, changed the whole direction of my life. That's right, because had I not gone to law school under the GI Bill, my background would have been an engineering type education, and I would have been off in another direction completely. But the GI Bill put me into the law school, so I.
Would you say it bettered your status in the end? Financially,
yes.
Socially.
Yes, financially, yes. It certainly they made a great difference in my life. Socially, I don't think it had any really too much of an impact socially. I believe that whatever social life we had would have been the same, regardless of whether I had gone to law school or not.
Well, that's very interesting. One of my focuses in this thesis is that I think that the GI Bill is perhaps, in the past years, perhaps the most important legislation that has been passed, because it helped foster a huge group in our society that's been relatively forgotten, what Richard Nixon used to call the silent majority. Mm-hmm. But they have been the integral builders and architects of the past 50 years, and I think this is the key. It allowed a lot of people to go places, do things, become people that they might have dreamed about in the service or before the war, But this has allowed them the freedom to get the education or the business.
Yeah, I agree with you completely.
And that fundamentally changed our whole society, our outlook, who we are today. I think the president referred back to it just 2 weeks ago. He wanted a middle-class Bill of Rights. He talked about the GI Bill of Rights that was passed.
I don't know about the majority, but I do know that for myself, it did. It changed the whole course of my life.
Well, I think that's some of the best not only the most important, but some of the best, well thought out legislation that's been passed.
Yes, I think as compared to say a bonus that they had done in the past. As a matter of fact, they did give a small cash bonus, as I recall. I've forgotten whether from the state or maybe from the government. But I think that the GI Bill, which enabled you to go in and really better yourself for something permanent, was much better than just making a cash payment to.
Bernard Baruch, you said he wanted legislation to reconnect the veteran to civilian life. Y'all had been gone as a group, 15 million strong, for 3 and 4 years, and it wasn't like World War I where veterans may not even have left the United States, and he knew that there was going to be a big problem. I think you're an end result of what he wanted, the reconnection into life. And of course, when y'all got reconnected, y'all changed society, I think, and it changed our direction as a country, what in our values and what we think, and that's very interesting. I'm glad to have interviewed you, and that's really what I'm looking for. I want to shake your hand, but let me ask you some questions then about things that happened in 45, 47, the 50s, the early 50s, things that are important now, and in a lot of public perception at the time could be negative and things like that. Now, I'd like to ask you, and this is sort of a question, I want you to look back from what you thought the war won in 1945 up into right now, and what do you think about the role of the United Nations as an institution? Do you think that that's a good institution? Do you believe that its role is justified? I mean, after seeing World War II?
I think that the theory of the United Nations is a real good theory. But as I see it having to be put into practice, if it's going to be an organization that's going to try to organize armies and fight to stop where they feel like something unjustified is going on, it's very, very difficult to try to come through on that, because each of the countries and its people feel like they owe their allegiance to their own country, and it's very difficult to some of the things that the United Nations is trying to do now is probably beyond what it's going to be able to do.
Do you think it's misplaced for the United States to be involved in the United Nations?
No, I don't think it's misplaced for the United States to be involved in the United Nations as a forum for getting together, airing all the disputes, getting what let everybody have their day in court, so to speak, or saying but enforcing a judgment or a resolution of the United Nations. That's where the rub comes in. That's where the difficulty comes in, and I have some difficulty in the present situation. We're in Bosnia, for example, where you know something bad is going on in another country, but to have our people subject to being called on to go in and become part of the fighting, that gives me a real problem.
Did you have the same sort of objection with the Gulf War? All that against Iraq?
I had no real objection to Gulf War because, again, listening to the way that it was presented, and with the U.S. being in primary control, and I know they had the backing of a United Nations resolution there, but it was a case where the American generals could direct their troops. I felt comfortable with that, and it felt like it was to the economic advantage or interest of the United States to step into the conflict, that we had something tangible back here that we could relate to, and that was the necessity for oil, and that our troops would be under the command of an American general. And I felt like I had no real difficulty with that. But it's when the United Nations comes up with a resolution and tells the United States, now you go and enforce this. As example, in Somalia, when the troops went in for to distribute food under a humanitarian type operation, and then later there was a conflict with the United Nations wanting them to clean up the arms, and which was something that needed to be done, but it makes it difficult. You go in under one set of parameters and then called upon to do something else after you get in and do some fighting that felt like was something that the Americans ought not to be involved in.
That's interesting. How do you, in 1945, we were the number one industrial power, we were the number one military power, and looking at the United Nations, and we were talking about the Gulf War and we can talk about Rwanda and Iran and all those things.
Number of
What do you, have you been overall, do you think that the United States, I don't know exactly what the right term is to attach to it, but the respect, I guess, accorded to the United States and to its arms, do you think that has decreased since World War II? Have we forgotten? Have people in Europe, have people in North Korea, have they forgotten?
I think that the technical aspects, weapons, systems that the United States have, I think that they still respect them, but I think what they don't respect is the will of the United States to go and use those weapons under certain circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So you believe, would you think that a World War II type intervention, when it's our national interest, say in the Gulf War or Grenada or someplace like that, where we feel it's a vital strategic interest, do you think that that's completely justified? I mean,
well, no country is perfect,
right?
And under our system of government, where we have elected people to run the country, and they make the decision that this is what ought to be done. We have to assume that they have listened to all of the arguments pro and con about it, and I would generally stand behind what the decision is. I realize that there's always a case for dissent. If anyone makes a decision, there's always another side to the argument, but unless I can see that we are clearly in the wrong and it should not be doing it, I would feel comfortable in backing up the decision of the president and what they would be doing. Of course, we're supposed to have enough balances in our governmental system to get that.
Though we've known that hasn't always been
no,
the case.
That's why I say nobody is perfect, and we know in theory that everything's supposed to be balanced out. So when something is finally done, it's been completely thought out.
I think one of the things I'm fumbling over my own vocabulary and the ideas that I have. I know you had connections with General Eisenhower during the war, and seeing the way you feel about the decisions to use force and things, were you disappointed? And General Eisenhower summed this up in his farewell speech in 1960, where he warned the United States of the military-industrial complex, and that. Do you feel disappointed that instead of, we put such a massive effort into defeating Hitler and the Japanese in World War II, and we wanted to sort of make the world safe for democracy? Remember the speech by Franklin Roosevelt, the Four Freedoms. Do you feel disappointed, or do you feel that we haven't won those things, that wasn't one, or if it was one, we let it go? You see what I'm saying? That the war, instead of getting rid of militarism and arms and war and those things. Instead, maybe fostered it or fostered our, as Americans, fostered our tendency or our penchant to try and use military force to solve foreign policy problems.
Well, it did not accomplish that goal of freeing the world from making it safe for democracy as far as that's concerned, because it's all over the world. They still fight. It changed the nature of fighting for sure, in particular with the advent of the atomic bomb. But it didn't accomplish the. It accomplished the immediate effect of what it started out to do. That is, Germany and Japan were defeated. But the long-term goal of making it free for democracy, I don't think that's yet been achieved worldwide. I mean, I know it has not been achieved worldwide.
Right. I mean, were you disappointed, though, that within, I read a survey that Army veterans coming back from the European theater of operations in 1945, they fully reflected the public's opinion in 1945 that within 20 years we would have a war with the Soviet Union. Was that disappointing to you? I mean, after all the
well, yes, it was disappointing because we went through a whole propaganda change from way back. I remember I believe it was 1933. It was only about 1933 that the United States recognized the Soviet Union, because it had come in as a result of force, and we were not. And so we're still regarding the Soviet Union with suspicion and saying what bad people they were. And then all of a sudden, after when it looked like it might be to our interest to support them because they were enemies of Germany, had a complete propaganda. Things may not be so bad, and then after the war, they changed back again 180 degrees to the pre-war concept, and it was disappointing. It was very disappointing and alarming too.
Well, let's go on with this. You say it's alarming. We saw, like in 1950, the Dies Committee, and then that became the House Un-American Activities Committee, and then of course Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn. What you'd gone through the war, you'd done all this stuff, and then you said this was alarming. Did you find that kind of activity, did you find that rather paranoid? I mean, how did you...
No, I didn't. Again, in the setting that you were back in the 50s, the early 50s, late 40s and early 50s, when it looked like that communism again was going to just mushroom out, and you get caught up in the thought, yes, we don't want to have it here, and we did have a communist party here in the United States, and
we still do.
And still do, that's right. And just felt like seeing what they had been capable of fostering, the Dies Committee, yeah.
But compared to Uncle Joe, I mean, only 5 years ago we were talking about Uncle Joe and
That's right, but at the time, of course, and only recently, I say recently, suspected all of the people that had been killed in the purge that Uncle Joe had fostered. I really didn't know about it until much later, and I suppose that the general public didn't know about it either. But
ideologically, it sounds like a very confusing time.
It's very confusing, and that's the reason I'm stumbling now, because of the ups and downs and the way that your allegiance goes. If it's to your advantage to be in allegiance with another country, have an ally there, regardless of what he may have done in the past, well, that's very disturbing.
Well, do you think it's a disappointment that what's happened with, what we used to know was West Germany, I mean, and then also Japan, did you find that when we're talking about this flip-flopping of ideology and action, we rearmed, we created West Germany in 1945, and they were rearmed and part of NATO by 1955, 10 years after the war. Did you think, what did you feel about that when you heard that, West Germany was now now that our friends, and, did you ever think that country could be, I guess if I was a veteran against the Germans, I'd be rather suspicious of the West Germans, and I would always think of them as Nazis or something like that. And
No, the way that it was presented, and you saw the pictures of the bombed out cities over there, people struggling among the rabble there, and the stones, and everything was completely broken up, and it was presented more as a humanitarian type project than
Marshall Plan.
The Marshall Plan. That's right, and it was it was not. I viewed it as that, and not as something of rearming.
When they actually physically rearmed, though, did they not?
Yeah. Yes, I mean we look today and see who our biggest competitors are in the world, and they're the people that we had 40, 50 years ago had lent a helping hand to. And
you don't have any prejudices like my grandfather in your purchasing. Like he won't buy anything Japanese or German. That doesn't govern your how you buy things.
Well, no, I don't have any. I'm looking for the best product,
Right.
And I have no prejudice as far as that is concerned. And if they can compete and put out the best product, well, I don't have any difficulty in buying a Japanese or a German product. Now, I would not necessarily want to buy a Russian product.
Right.
Not because of what their ideological background might be, but because they just can't make anything worthwhile.
The way we're invested over there, there's no telling what kind of products are going to be here on the market.
Well, that's right. Now, of course, if they get some American technology in there and come around, they got this huge labor force over there. If they can be convinced to get rid of their old ways and going into the mainstream, well, they are a sleeping giant.
Well, that's interesting. You know, you have seen World War II, and I guess even I might be classified as this, but we're both, in a sense, maybe Cold Warriors. More than I. You had been through what we call the Cold War, which ended. Did you ever think you would see the end of hostilities with the Soviet Union or the hostile environment?
No.
Was that a surprise to you in 1989?
It was a real surprise to me, and I felt like everyone at least felt like Ronald Reagan felt when Gorbachev went to Iceland and came up with this proposal. Well, this is just a lot of Soviet propaganda, and what do they have up their sleeve?
Right.
And yes, I was really surprised to see that it was going to materialize, and that the man was actually trying to do something for the Soviet Union to bring them in step with the rest of the world. Very surprised.
Yeah. In relatively bloodless, all except for one country, where Romania, where they had a slight civil war outbreak, and they had some bloodshed where they deposed the communists. But overall, it's been a fairly bloodless change in government. Did you ever think? I mean, how did you view the end of communism? I'd like to. What was your conception of how it would all?
Well, I had no conception, because it caught me by complete surprise, as did the wall coming down in Berlin, as did the joinder of East and West.
You saw it come up on the nightly news, and then you saw it come down on the nightly news.
That's right. Your question was what again?
Was just the fact that it was surprising just because it happened, one, and then two, it was relatively bloodless.
Yes, but as you can see it unfolding, though, in the Soviet Union in particular, I don't know that we can count on it being bloodless indefinitely, because I did not realize until the last couple of years what a diverse makeup the Soviet Union had, and that they were just held together primarily by force. there's a gap in my my geography and basic education.
How do you think the 50s would have been different if we had known, if we had actually talked about, the Soviet Union as a group of people?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that the 50s would have been any different, because presumably the people that are in our government, and particularly in the intelligence part of the government, knew all of this, and so I don't believe it would have changed our. If the public had known, I don't know, it would change.
It's certain that they didn't advertise it.
No, they certainly didn't advertise it. That's right. Of course, it was also to the advantage of our government to keep it portrayed as a real strong central force, because of getting action on the budget when it goes through Congress for the defense budget, spending, that sort of thing. It's to the government's benefit to keep that image.
Dwight Eisenhower's military-industrial complex.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you worked on you were attached to his staff.
No, I was not attached to his staff. The only time that I saw General Eisenhower was just before the invasion of Normandy. They had a large fleet that was assembled all over England, Ireland, different ports, and he had come into one of the ports and asked for representatives from a number of the ships to come in before the invasion, because he wanted to speak to them, and I was one of the representatives off on a ship to go and listen to it.
Well, when he ran for president in, I guess it was, 1950?
I believe that's correct.
1951, 1950. What did you think about that? I mean,
well, I just thought that he was a fine man, that he had everything that it took to be a president, and was wholeheartedly in favor of him, supported him, yes.
Mm-hmm. And did that change your voting pattern? Would you typify yourself as a Democrat before that, and then you voted Republican, or had you even voted before that?
I don't know that I had voted before that, and I generally look for, regardless of the party of a man, to what his credentials are to vote, so the party affiliation wouldn't make any difference.
Well, that's the. What did you like? So you liked Eisenhower. Let's talk about what happened between Eisenhower and Kennedy, who was a a little bit older. He's part of your generation, but you're a little bit older than he is. Eisenhower, of course, comes from the World War I generation. What did you agree with? Would you agree with the statement that Time magazine said that Kennedy symbolized a definite transition in national politics, and that the young veterans, they always put that in quotes, were taking over now in Washington, and that they had a can-do kind of work ethic, and that things were definitely going to be changed for the better. What did you think about you? I like Eisenhower a lot. I can tell you like Eisenhower a lot. What did you think about when Kennedy came, and on all the rest of the veterans who went to Washington after that point? I mean, what did you?
I can only speak about Kennedy, because he was really the focus there. I did not know a lot about the others, but I felt like that. He had the wheels pretty well greased on his political machine by his father to get him lined up to take over as the president.
Were you disappointed with?
Well, I thought that he was fairly young to be in such a responsible position.
Never mind the fact that he had been in the Navy. Had this experience with war and the PT boats and all that.
That's right. No, I looked at myself in the experience and felt like it really ought to have a little more experience to take over take over the country.
So when Bay of Pigs came around, did that sort of reconfirm what you felt your prejudices about Kennedy?
No, I just felt like I gave him A for effort on that, and all military campaigns are not successful, and this is one that just went bad. As I would give Carter when he tried to organize an expedition to go in and retrieve the hostages in Iran. Things go bad sometimes in military operation, and that didn't affect me one way or another. Except that I gave him A for effort on trying to get something going.
That's really.
Yeah, and I also felt like that when he put down the ultimatum to Khrushchev, I guess he was at that time, to withdraw the missiles from Cuba, that I was with him. So I was not prejudiced against him in that respect.
How did you feel when aside from I don't want to try and get too political with this. When George Bush lost the election here recently, and a lot of people talked about, Newsweek said this was so long, soldier, the end of an era. Did you feel like a new generation was coming to the focus? Your children's generation. Did you feel like we had passed the torch in any sense? Like Eisenhower, he talked about passing the torch to y'all's generation. Did you feel like that had happened, or do you feel like don't count us out yet?
No, that's right. I didn't feel like the torch had been passed. That's just one election. I felt like, and things will change it the next go round.
So
it really didn't affect me that way.
You think the veterans are still going to be here too?
Well, I don't look at it from the standpoint of the veterans. I feel like that the veterans have they've truly served in the war and they did something, but we now are all citizens, and it has nothing. To me, it has nothing to do with your past performance in the service, unless it is something where you need governmental assistance because, for example, the VA hospitals that you need the assistance. But we are all citizens now, and I don't believe that being a veteran makes you any different from any other citizen.
That really highlights something I'm looking at too. World War I veterans were rather a select group. And up until the 1950s, we still had Civil War veterans on VA rolls. And I think it's one of the things my thesis looks at in its structure is the fact that World War II veterans really don't see themselves as a veterans group. They don't, not like the World War I veterans, the bonus marchers that Anacostia flags.
Right.
And I think that's a very interesting attitude. What I want to use that as a bridge into. Are you a member of any type of veterans organization?
No, I'm not. I belonged briefly to the American Legion when I came back after the war and settled in Shreveport, primarily because my father-in-law, who was a World War I veteran, belonged to the American Legion, said that's the thing that you really ought to do. And I've joined for just a few years, but they dropped out because, again, I just see myself as a citizen and not necessarily as a veteran.
You just did what you had to do.
Right. That's it.
That's interesting, though. Is American veterans, though, as historically, as I've surveyed a little bit, I mean, from the Revolutionary War, except for, and even Vietnam veterans feel a little differently. World War II veterans are an exception. They just don't see themselves they see themselves as veterans. They're starting to be more nostalgic about it as a group. I mean, I'm not talking about I don't know how you are on an individual level, but they have as I read from a 1947 article, this fellow was standing down at the turnstiles of 42nd Street for the subway in New York City, and he said you had to wait exactly like 12.7 minutes before you'd see somebody walking along wearing the ruptured duck. And he said, World War II veterans just aren't veterans. They're something else. They're citizens.
Right. We've been absorbed into society, and we're a part of it in passing it.
Do you think that has something to do with the fact that the type of benefits that y'all received when y'all came out of service,
I feel like that first of all, you got to consider that my entire education was paid for by the government through the Service Academy and through the GI Bill. But the government has repaid me, the country has repaid me in the best way that they could for what service that I performed for them. And I feel like, yes, as far as I'm concerned, it does have a great deal. If I felt like that I had been neglected, and I might feel differently. And it may be different with the Vietnam veterans, from what I have read, because they were not necessarily recognized as they should have been originally. But I feel like that I have been recognized. I have been taken care of by the government, put on my feet and put out to do. It's up to me now to go ahead or was up to me to do what I could do with the background that the government had provided.
That's you're right on where I want to be. I'd like to ask just an aside question, kind of getting away from where we just were and what we just talked about for the past couple of minutes or so. Did you ever have any scary moments with thinking about you might get called up for Korea or anything like that? Did you? Was that ever?
No, because when I resigned my commission, I was no longer subject to being recalled into the Navy. Now I had a number of classmates after the war from the academy who resigned their regular commissions, but at the time there were so many regular officers that were leaving the service till they put in a requirement that in order for them to accept your resignation, you had to take a reserve commission. And a number of my classmates who had resigned and took a reserve commission were called back up, but I was not concerned about that because when I resigned, they accepted my resignation without any strings on it.
Well, that's interesting. You know, a lot of vets were upset. You know, they joined the Guard or whatever, and they just thought it would be easy money.
Well, that's right, and you see the same thing during the Gulf War too, separating families, and then concerns about they unduly calling up a minority percentage of an undue percentage of the minority population, that sort of thing. But you got to remember they were receiving pay for doing just routine type things before they were called for, and knew that in the background that was something that would have to be maybe done someday.
Well, that's interesting. We haven't talked at all about minorities, and I know that when you went into the Navy, that the Navy was a relatively segregated institution.
Yes, it was extremely segregated. There were no minorities. When I say minorities, I'm talking about blacks. But
right.
I'm talking about blacks.
I understand.
In the academy, there have been very few ever appointed, and those that were appointed, I don't know that any ever graduated. And in the fleet itself, and in the active service, the blacks served as stewards mates, and clerks. But that was the extent of it, and it was very segregated.
And you came from Shreveport.
Yes.
Which also had we had segregation.
Absolutely.
And segregation here. Did your experience with what you saw in World War II, with these men on? I guess I assume you had some on your destroyer.
Yes, we did. They served as in the mess, as stewards mates. They were waiters, so to speak, bus boys, so to speak, cooks, and that sort of thing. That was it. But yes, I saw, for example, there were a couple on my destroyer there that were obviously intelligent and qualified for a lot more than what they were assigned to do.
Do you think the war, with that type of exposure away from here, away from all this history and the way of custom and all that stuff that Edmund Burke talks about, did you think, and I guess what I want you to do is describe your ideas about blacks and whites before the war, and then what you saw with these blacks on board your ship, and then when you came back, did you think that the civil rights movement was a good thing? You know, that started up in '54, and then of course we had Little Rock, and then Martin Luther King, the bus rights. Did World War II change your attitudes towards?
No, it did not. It really did not change my attitude at all. I still.
And this is completely.
Yeah, I understand.
This is between you and I. And
no, it did not change the attitude at all. I felt like that everyone ought to be treated fairly, but I did not. I resented, and still resent, being forced to accept somebody in the company, so to speak, that I didn't necessarily invite in, and that's just the way it is.
So you don't see you didn't think the quality of the armed services would go down like a lot of people thought in 1948 when Truman integrated the armed services and passed those.
I felt like it would cause some difficulty from what I had seen in the service, but I have no way of knowing whether it did or did not because it's long since been out.
And obviously our military's done seems pretty good. Seems pretty confident we did a pretty good job in Panama.
That's right. Did a good job.
That's interesting.
Well, another thing too, of course, that is that seeing that chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a black, and I had the utmost respect for. I'm talking about Colin Powell, who's no longer chairman of the Joint Chiefs, which had the utmost respect for him, did a fine job, and it was always we were always talking about saluting the uniform and not necessarily saluting the man. That's
well, you know, World War II is such a catalyst for so many things, minorities, ideologies and things in the United States, science, that kind of thing, and of course social welfare, I think, in the case of the GI Bill. I guess now I want to get down to sort of wrapping this up. We've been talking now for almost about an hour, and I think we've covered some really, really good ground. What do you think the legacy of World War II is for you personally? What do you think, when you come down to it and you're standing before the Great White Throne, and what is the legacy of World War II that you want to bequeath to my generation, your grandchildren? What do you think the war, in the end? What do you think? How do you sum up the war in the sum of your total experience? And I can tell that you're a very accomplished individual, and there's a lot of things.
I think that the one lesson is that war does not necessarily mean everlasting peace. Now, you may win the war, but it's not going to accomplish everlasting peace. It's got to be achieved from some other method. That's not to say we need to abolish the army, because we do need to have it, but it needs to be used in defense, and that war will not settle human problems forever. It may temporarily put the lid on, but they boil over eventually, and that's it. That's all that I can see.
There's nothing. I almost want to think that veterans, when they just walk around, they see things differently than non-veterans. They always see something or they're happy for certain things that non-veterans will never know how good a hot bath can really feel. That kind of thing. Is there anything like that? I mean, that kind of final.
No, because shipboard life is different from being in the foxhole somewhere. Shipboard life is you're carrying with you your living compartment, your eating facilities right on this ship. So that is not as striking to me as it may have been to a GI that's strung out in a foxhole somewhere and doesn't have all those facilities available to him.
What about the war effort itself and the United States? That's variously referred to as the Good War, or the war where everybody in the United States pulled together, where everybody was unified. Do you agree with that generalization? And
well, I don't necessarily. It's a good war. It was a necessary war, because after all, we were attacked at Pearl Harbor,
right?
And that was just like striking a match to it. And up to that time, had been having talks in Washington with the Japanese, and you don't have to. It's not something that we insinuated ourselves into, as maybe in Vietnam and the Gulf and some of the other places. And that made a big difference. We were attacked, and we're defending ourselves. Of course, it got beyond that, but that made a big difference.
Do you think this country, especially looking at today, where we have the Senate Foreign Relations Chairman telling the President not to come to South Carolina, we've got this group over here in the Congress wanting this agenda, and this group over here opposed to it, and we've got a new third parties in some ways with Ross Perot, and it just seems like you got Rush on one side and you got other people on Evans and Novak and on the other on TV. Do you think that do you think this country has forgotten what it was like to be unified to fight this war? I mean, do you think we need a good dose of that good dose of that unity, that we all need to pull together on the team, and maybe we could?
Well, we need to pull together on a team. I don't know that we need a war to force us together at all, but the spirit today is just so different the spirit was when we were united and on a common goal of trying to accomplish something real big. Because everybody during the war was ready to make a sacrifice. And now, nobody's willing to sacrifice. That's the problem. Nobody will everybody says, I want what I've got, and I want just a little bit more.
We talk about, I think the new term is the victimization of society. You know, OJ's just as much a victim as his wife. This person's a victim, this and this. I think that's a problem that we have, and I identify with what you're saying. I really do think that we could use a good dose of that spirit.
Well, we could use a dose of everybody standing on their own feet, trying to move forward and do something, and not waiting for somebody else to do something for them, or saying it's your fault the way I am. It's just not like it was 50 years ago, of course.
Well, I wonder how much that is just the way that our society has rapidly become so mechanized and technological.
Right. Who is to say? I mean, after all, the world has been changing every century since time began. And it's just not a part of the evolution of the world. It may be. I don't know.
Well, I really enjoyed this. This has been a very good interview for me. And I just want to ask. I have a question sheet here, and I know I'm not supposed to be doing this, but I'd like to ask a particular question. I'm gonna. These are just specific questions. This is about the quality of your life, and I want to compare it to, say, 1935, 1945, 1955, 1965. Would you say that your quality of life improved from those, say, from the middle of the Depression, the end of World War II, the middle of the 50s, and the middle of the 60s?
Well, if you put it on a graph at a 45-degree angle, my quality of life has been going up on the 45-degree angle right along.
That's both economically, spiritually, those things.
Yes.
Would you say that the quality of life you're living now is I guess is better than what you were living when you were a child, and better than your parents at this particular age?
Yes.
How much would you attribute that to? Things like the GI Bill that is allowed. Would you contribute to like 90% of that is 50% of that is I got the money to do this, and 50%?
No, I'd have to attribute a great deal of it to my parents that gave me the background, and they instilled the ethic into me is a great part of that. That's right. I would attribute a part of it to my education at the Naval Academy. A great part of it to the GI Bill that enabled me to go to law school. And of course, I've got to attribute some of it to myself because I've just let those things go by the board and not had any initiative. And, but I owe a lot to a lot of people. That's what I'm saying, and to myself.
That seems to be the case across the board. A lot of historians make these blanket statements about it's this.
No, it's just a lot of things rolled together.
Right. That's one reason why I wanted to do an oral history, because I don't particularly like blanket generalizations. Even though in this project I have to.
You're going to have to come up with.
I have to use, you know. So let's see. I asked you about the point system, and did you? This is something that's kind of an oddball kind of question, but it is important. I guess maybe you didn't hear so much about it because you were in Europe, in the Atlantic. Well, actually, you know, you're in the United States. Did you remember hearing about the servicemen protest concerning the point system and the discharge? The historical background is there was a slowdown in demobilization, and then the Army, especially in Manila, about 10,000 servicemen got together. They were rather irate about having to hear that they might be stuck in the Philippines for another year, and they wanted to go home, you know.
Really, I had not heard of that.
So you hadn't...
I was not aware of that.
Well, it was a big sting. Eisenhower got cornered on the Hill by some irate women from one of the big Bring Back Daddy clubs that were big at the time, and right after that it was so embarrassing he signed an order to speed up demobilization. And I was just wondering if you...
No, I was not aware of that.
Okay, some of the veterans are, and some of them aren't. Most of them aren't. It's not really a widespread phenomenon, it's important because it's one of the, they could have strung all these guys up as mutineers and that kind of thing. The Navy wasn't really affected by a lot of these problems because their demobilization system wasn't scheduled to begin until this capitulation of Japan, and that way they missed out on a lot of irate people because the Army had been discharging since '44, and I think I've got just about everything that it's obvious you're not getting any service from the VA. That's one of my questions.
Yeah.
And I've sort of asked what I need to do, and I really appreciate you taking your time. It's been about an hour.
Okay. I have no idea where Memley is or where the
Well, that's fine. That's fine because